all democracies, nation states have to tell a story about their past. What is it that makes us a community of fate, right? Which is why history has been, this department has been so central, right, to debates, right? Now, that's where I'll be very candid with you. I think Jawaharlal Nehru was an exception, Gandhi was an exception to this, but everybody else practically goofed up on this, including our tribe of academic historians. How did we goof up? We basically said that the viability of this democratic project depends on getting a story of the past right. Right? So if you can say this is a shared story of syncretism, Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb, some, accommodation, it's right. Gandhi was very clear in seeing this. And Gandhi said, look, history is a fool's paradise. If tomorrow you discover new documents showing a deeper history of Hindu-Muslim conflict, should the future of Indian Republic depend on that? Right? Unfortunately, all sides in the debate got wedded to this project that the question is not the question of the social contract going forward. Right? The question is one of what is the story we tell of this Indian identity. Right? So the left and right were arguing on the same terrain. The left, I'm using it loosely, was basically saying if we can show this story to be a story of accommodation, or something like that, it kind of strengthens the case for modern India. The right says if we show this story to be a conflict, right? And that's part. Now again, this is a fool's paradise, right? You cannot, it's remarkable how rare that position was in Indian politics or in Indian academia, where somebody would say, let's for a moment stipulate, maybe it's true, right, that some Muslim rulers are pressed into, let's for a moment stipulate it, right? This is a historical question. It should have zero bearing on what our social contract going forward is. So you interpolated a politics that is entirely both left and right constituted by the question of getting this historical narrative right. And at some point that was going to snap. The left narrative was on very fragile foundations historiographically. I'm not saying the right one is the correct one. But it's, history is messy, right? Right? So the question, and that goes back to the question of identity again in some ways, that you ended up saying that the fate of this democracy turns on getting a narrative of this shared community of fate correct. And we are still playing out that argument. One of the things that's frustrating about Indian politics right now, we are actually playing out the 1930s literally again. The debate over representation. What does the BJP say? BJP basically says, look, minorities ko veto de diya tha Congress ne. We'll take away the veto. It's basically about that representation story, right? Why do we need this? And it's about telling this history story, which is exactly the issue in the 1930s, right? So where do you go out of this, right? If that's the innocent, right? Which is, so long as those identities remain the organizing principle of politics, you cannot get out of this conundrum. You will keep falling into the same trap, in a sense, over and over and over again. And we do it in the most subtle forms. In fact, well-meaning ones are more. So these days, if you go to a music concert, you see a piece of art, right? The first criticism of that art is, Reva, this is such a example of syncretism, hybridity. Criticism as like the practice of critique, right? Not as in bad, right? Just because it has the confluence of two things that makes it better, right? Or something like that, right? Now, at one level, that's perfectly understandable in a context where you have a political party that is willing to deny the existence and, in a sense, space even for languages, cultures, all of that stuff, right? So you want to make this gesture. Look, I mean, this is constituted by, right? But at another level, it's falling into the same trap, right? Which is, though identities are better than one, if it's a mixture of two, it's better than one. And it takes you away from that point of transcendence and cognitive content, right? Dara Shiko's Majma'ul Bahrain, right? The great thing about that text is not that this is a dialogue between Hindus and Muslims and he'll say, can we use the Upanishads to interpret the Quran? I mean, he's not into identity politics. What he's interested in is the philosophical question, right? Of the nature and identity of the self, and he's willing to go wherever that is, right? So, think of the canons of criticism, historiography, everything we've created, right? Is not focused on it gets trapped in that identity, right? So, which is why, I mean, if you're thinking of an alternative politics, right? I mean, think of so long as we keep structuring politics around this question, some will do it in very malign ways, some will be very well-meaning. You will actually end up in the same cul-de-sac.